Thank you all again for your service to the country, which I know has been long and distinguished, and particularly in a tough and difficult place like Afghanistan and more broadly in the Middle East and Central Asia. I'd like to start out by asking a question about ongoing political developments in Afghanistan. Obviously, we have new partners at the senior levels of the government there. I guess last month, I think the Parliament confirmed about a third of the nominees for the new cabinet that President Ghani proposed. Could you get your quick perspective on the prospects for further confirmation so there'd be a full working leadership at the senior levels of the Afghan government?
Senator, I know that President Ghani and Dr. Abdullah are quite focused on fleshing out the rest of the leadership positions in the government. I'm not directly involved in conversations with them, but I know that they're working hard to present both another list of candidates for positions, as well as doing the necessary work that needs to be done with the Parliament itself to obtain confirmations of their ministers. It's to be expected that this is a difficult process. It's a unique arrangement that they now have, working together on the government and cooperating with each other as a collaborative effort in identifying people for positions, as well as trying to set the bar for capability higher than it may have been in some cases in the past. So it's taking longer than anybody wants. It's certainly taking longer than either of them want or the Afghan people want. But they're working hard at it. I'm confident that they will succeed.
Ambassador Crocker.
Again, Senator, I look at this over a longer timeline, having been in Afghanistan shortly after the fall of the Taliban and seeing how little there was, including any real basis for political understandings among factions who had been on opposite sides of the fight in many cases. So I perhaps see more progress than those who are looking at snapshots today. The fact that Dr. Ghani and Dr. Abdullah can sit down and thrash through a slate of ministerial nominees, to me, is the important point. Not that some of them ran into trouble with the Parliament, not unexpectedly. And we're now going through, again, a second round, as Ambassador Cunningham said, as they try to get nominees identified, vetted. Financial disclosure statements do have their use. I can now acknowledge, no longer having to do them. But this is a slow, painful process. But it is a process that is working, frankly, far better than many would have expected.
Does the government of Afghanistan still, the president still appoint the provincial and district governors? That was the case when I was there on active duty in 08 and 09.
Yes, that's still the case.
Have you seen have we seen the quality of local government services and responsiveness increase over what I saw in 2008, 2009, when governors were understandably responsive to their constituency of one in Kabul as opposed to the local population?
I'd say it's a mixed bag. The provincial and district government works when there are good people there and when they both know how to work Kabul and they know how to cooperate with their security and other partners at the provincial and district level, and there are places where it still doesn't work very well. It's a high priority for both President Ghani and Dr. Abdullah to improve the operations of the Kabul provincial district relationship, both in terms of the people who are appointed and in terms of reforming how business is done. This is again one of the several reform items that's being delayed by the delay in setting up the new government. But they and the people around them are aware of the problem, and one of Ghani's driving principles, which Abdullah has bought into quite completely, is they need to have better people in government.
Good.
Period.
Good. If I could squeeze in one more question, Admiral Olson, could you give us your thoughts on the practical effect on our counterterrorism efforts if we follow one course of action, which is essentially to shut down every installation in Regional Command East and Bagram Airfield and retrench back to Kabul Airfield?
Effective counterterrorism requires a rapid response capability, and I think withdrawing to a single location in south central Afghanistan will reduce the capability to respond rapidly to emerging situations, and so I think that there would be, it would have a detrimental effect.
Thank you. This draft use of force resolution that goes to the broader point we've been discussing about deadline-driven operations. The resolution also has a 3-year expiration date on it. Are any of you aware of past use of force resolutions or declarations of war going back to the start of our country's history that had an explicit expiration date?
Senator, I am not flipping through my depleted memory banks in 30 seconds cannot be considered the definitive statement on that subject. But I would just offer the opinion, and I've not seen the draft authorization. It goes back to our earlier conversation about calendar versus condition-based timelines. You know, in the world that I have spent so much of my life in, it's all about conditions. It's not about calendars. You all know the hackneyed mantra attributed to the Taliban. You Americans may have the watches, we have the time. Calendars work for our adversaries more than they work for us. And again, I haven't seen the language of the authorization, so I can't comment on it. In the world that is the Middle East, having arbitrary timelines generally does not serve U.S. interests.
And you've all said that you take the view that in Afghanistan, we're sending the wrong message by having a deadline-driven policy rather than a conditions-driven policy. Would you agree with Ambassador Crocker's statements that more broadly, if we have deadline-driven policies, if we pass resolutions authorizing the use of force with explicit authorization dates, we're sending the same signal to different adversaries all around the world?
I think the issue is the issue will be what is the rationale behind having the deadline. Again, I don't know if there's been any precedent for that or not. There may be. I don't remember what the Patriot Act said, for instance. I remember it was repeatedly debated and updated over the years. If the purpose of this is to signal that that's only as long as we're willing to make the effort, then I think that's the wrong signal. Because I think we're, as I said earlier, before you came, Senator, this whole complex of issues, I believe to be a generational challenge that we will be dealing with for a long time, and we need to get smarter at dealing with it. But if the purpose is to signal the importance of maintaining political control and updating the provisions of the use of force, and there will be a debate about that in the Congress, I know, then that is, I think that's entirely appropriate.